Today we're going to cover the most underrated and equally effective exercises, starting with the biceps. I am a fan of the easy preacher curl. It's easy on the wrists, so we've got that half supination, which allows you to activate your biceps because we're doing a bicep curl. The position of the arms relative to the torso makes it such that it becomes more of a contraction biased biceps exercise. So it is a great tool in your overall bicep building toolbox. And the grindability of this exercise is awesome because your elbows are fixed. You get to a sticking point, you start shaking, you want to give up, you don't give up, you keep going, and you can often surprise yourself with how many reps that you can do. For this one, I err on the side of safety in terms of not going for that extreme lockout. Extreme lockout being triceps contracted, full bicep elongation, stretching back. Just a soft bend in the elbow to mitigate the injury risk. Not saying this will cause injury, but you're less likely to do it in this fashion. I would also just progress and proceed with caution in terms of not trying to do an extreme heavy weight from one week to the next, and you'll build really nice biceps when it's part of a comprehensive program for which there's other exercises.
Cool, that's a good choice. I also like how it's a little bit flexible based on like how you position your body. Like, are you lean forward? Are you lean back a little bit? Like more stretch, more contraction? Yeah. So I've had those in my program for a long time. I think my choice though is going to be incline dumbbell curls. So you're sat on a bench, you're lean back, anywhere from like 60 degrees to maybe 45-ish degrees. And so the arms are actually behind the body in this case. So they're a little bit more lengthened, but there isn't as much tension in that fully bottom position. So it's a more mid-range, I would say, focused movement. And I like this because I've had some tendonitis issues. And so sometimes going for a preacher, especially if it's a strict one and it's really a lot of tension in the bottom position, I find that does sometimes beat me up, maybe progressing a little bit too quickly. But I have found that having the incline dumbbell curl where it is lengthened, but it's not like a massive amount of tension in the bottom position has been super useful. And it's also fairly grindable. Sometimes I do get a little bit of like chest involved in terms of like just getting the weight up. And so, yeah, that would be my pick. I see a lot of people going for barbell curls. I think those are okay, but it often ends up being just kind of a mess. And so having something where you're a little bit more locked in, whether it's an incline curl, you're on the bench, or preacher, everything is locked in there. You can't run and hide from the tension.
No, and what's interesting about these two exercises is they will bias slightly different parts of the bicep. Your incline curl is more long head, and the preacher curl is more short head. This isn't to say that because you're doing one or the other, all of it is going to go to the inner versus outer biceps. It'll contribute a little bit. How much practically in the real world this is going to help is debatable, but the logic of having a stretched focused and a contraction focused bicep exercise makes you well-rounded.
Yeah, and this is where bodybuilders have kind of had some lifting wisdom over the years where, oh, like this is the peak and this is, this works at just like different area, or this is for like the lower biceps on the preacher curl, or this is for a little bit of a different area. I think there is more and more research coming out saying, hey, actually regional hypertrophy, very much a thing. And so again, it doesn't need to dictate every aspect of your program, but I think having some variety and using more than one curl is a good idea. When someone's like, it's just elbow flexion. Well, it is elbow flexion, but there's a little bit more to it than that, yeah.
Of course. The triceps, AKA the horseshoe of the arm, is an underrated area for muscular growth and development because people get into bodybuilding, biceps, biceps, biceps. Show me your muscle, bro. It's always flexing this. No one ever goes intuitively, check out these feathers here. But it adds around 2/3 of the arm is the common thinking based on muscle mass. There's 3 heads of the triceps and it needs to be trained in different ways to comprehensively grow the muscle and strengthen the muscle. The research does show that overhead tricep extensions are absolute gold. If you're not doing them in some way, shape or form, you're probably missing out on particularly the long head of the tricep, which does elbow extension as well as shoulder extension. My choice for the overhead tricep extension is the easy tricep extension exercise. Firstly, I love it because it's accessible. Cables are great, but if you're in a busy gym, you can't always get access to it. But with something such as a skull crusher, you can do it. If you have an easy curl bar, you can do it with that. If someone's hogging that piece of equipment, you can use dumbbells to get the same thing. I like the easy variation because it's nice and stable, because both arms are doing the same action. I find with dumbbells, you get a bit, one side starts doing more than the other, and it can feel a little bit awkward if you're not used to that particular movement. Feels great on the elbows because of where your hands are placed. It's not a completely straight bar, so you're off neutral. I also like doing the skull crushers with my thumbs over in this fashion, just because it affords you more rotation at both the wrist as well as the forearm. And the benefit of that is downstream tends to be nicer on the elbows. So small detail, but it can make it feel better for you. There's a lot of different ways to do this movement. You can go to the head, skull crusher-esque, just to this point, overloading the elbow extension component mainly. I personally enjoy doing it this way because it's reliable, it's repeatable. I challenge the triceps as elbow extensors predominantly in this fashion, but you can also do it behind the head. You can get a big stretch. You can do it Geoffrey, Verity, Schofield style. You can get that shoulder extension aspect of the triceps, which is cool too. It just modifies how much weight you can use. So for me, this one is an absolute bread and butter exercise. You can keep progressing it long term with heavier weights. Feels good if you get used to the technique and you find a elbow orientation that suits you. And it's just nice to do a bit of a free weight movement as well. It doesn't always have to be cables.
Yeah, so I will say that's a good choice. I've experienced a similar thing with dumbbells. It just doesn't, like the shoulders, something happens, like one side is moving out or something. So I actually do like an easy bar as well. I will say that I do like starting most of my quote unquote bro days, so arm and shoulder days, with a push down, right? It's a little bit more contraction focused, a little bit more elbow friendly. And so having that early on in the session for me it's something I always do, right? Could be a short cable, could be a long cable. That's not my pick for the movement. I'm just saying that's what I typically do. And then I do like an easy or a cable extension. So I usually use a rope, sometimes I use a V-bar, and I have a few different sort of variations of the variation that I do. One would be when you're standing up, so you're totally strict. The other would be when you are leaning away, so you have it behind you and you sort of have to brace and twist around, and then you're leaning out away.
Yeah.
This is sort of the most cheatable, where you can use a little bit of oomph to drive through. So maybe you hit failure, but you can still use the hips to drive through, and then control, and then drive through. So you kind of develop a rhythm, and you can use that to go beyond failure. And then there's a third variation that I do, probably not necessarily to have three. It's sort of in the middle where I do it on what I would usually do push downs on. And so it's up above, and then you can kind of fix the hips, but still use the abs a little bit as needed to drive through. Either way, I think all of these are good variations, as long as you are pushing hard, pushing to failure, and then having the arm roughly in this position and you're extending upwards. You did note when I was doing them that I wasn't locking them out, and that's something I hadn't really even considered. I just thought that, hey, the big stretch and what I really want out of the movement is gonna be right around here, and this part almost feels like a little bit more dealt and like just lockout that isn't quite as productive. And so I typically keep it roughly in this part of the range of motion.
All of the exercises we mentioned with easy skull crushers, overhead, tricep extensions, they're all working the overhead position. So the lengthened part of the triceps, which so many research papers showing that this is a really key area for development of the triceps. And one, not better or worse than the other, they're just variations. You're planning to lift for the rest of your life. You're not just going to stick dogmatically to the easy curl bar or just the cable station. You can mix it up with the rope, the attachment that is the V-bar, and playing around with those different torso positions is fantastic because it modifies what the abs are doing. Your completely vertical ones, the most demanding to try and keep the ribs from flaring too much. Not that it's overly important for what the triceps are doing, but If you want to integrate that Valsalva kind of maneuver and ribs down bracing, you can do it if you want in that variation. Whereas if you're horizontal, it's not as demanding over there as well. What are the differences with the rope versus the V-bar?
So I actually find this isn't talked about very much. The biggest difference is stability. So sometimes people will do the rope and it'll like sort of bubble around the balls will scrape together and
as you're holding the balls. Yeah, we understand.
I still like the rope.
Very elbow friendly, degrees of freedom.
Yes, exactly. And another thing is that it forces you to pull. Whereas when you have the V-bar, you can push. And those are two slightly different things. So the long end of the triceps, you want to keep the shoulders extended, you want to keep the elbows high and then extend through here, like you're throwing something. Like if you're throwing a baseball upwards, you wouldn't try to push the baseball, you're trying to fling it. So when you're using a rope, it puts you in that position where you're just pulling, right? Whereas if you have something very, very stable, you can push against it. And so you might get a little bit of front delt involved and turn it into a little bit of a press even. And that's not the end of the world, it just means that it's probably gonna be a little bit less long head and a little bit more of the other heads and sort of, it's almost like a shrugged up press.
Interesting with the rope, as a consequence of that, you'll be lifting lighter weights.
Yes.
And the V-bar, you'll be able to push heavier weights, but being mindful of how your mechanics change based on what attachment.
Yeah, and you can feel it. And yes, you will be stronger with the V-bar. And some people think that, oh, it's the stability. It's because you can get that pressing type of action, and the front delt is quite a strong muscle group, especially compared to the arms. And so you're probably looking at 30-40% more weight on that variation.
Okay, but the key thing is having a lengthened triceps exercise would be your first pick. If you could only pick one, it would be overhead. But you do a contraction focused below head height tricep exercise as well.
Beforehand, yeah.
Okay.
Learn how to mix calisthenics and weights with FitnessFAQs. Get the best of both worlds by shopping FitnessFAQs workouts.
Developing a pair of Popeye looking forearms that are not only strong, but also muscular as well, can make you look yoked. You got a t-shirt on, you've got a shirt on at work, and someone sees some rolled up sleeves, they see these forearms popping out, they know that you're serious, they know that you lift, and it's the sign of someone that is strong. You can't have these yoked forearms without being someone that can do something with their body. Whether it's a tradesperson that works outside, or if you're just a gym rat that's lifting and lifting hard. My tip for forearms is a concept first and foremost. Not using straps where possible on upper body exercises. So not using straps for rows, pull-ups is fantastic for getting in just cumulative stimulus into your forearms. And the argument's coming straight away, but you're not able to fully exhaust your back muscles because the grip's a limiting factor. Look how big your back is. Sure, it's a component, 80-20 principle. Spend the majority of time lifting without straps. If you're really cooked on your last set, go for it, chuck on some straps, fully exhaust your back, that's all gravy. But if you just lift with straps, your grip will be weak, your forearms will atrophy into absolute oblivion, they'll waste away. For personally, jokes aside, when I was entering the bodybuilding world, straps, everyone says, you gotta use straps for everything, use it. I really suffered on my compound lifts, because you gotta think your grip and forearms, your hands are essentially a connection to your shoulders. So if you can't grip it, you can't rip it. There we go, I'm just spitting bars. But it can reduce your neural output if you don't have a foundation there. And I think it's pretty unanimously agreed upon. Obviously other things where grip will really limit you, RDLs, deadlifts, use them on that. But when you see someone in the gym doing, I don't know, a bicep curl with straps and Jeff's just absolutely just wants to scream over there. It's not good. So first thing, lift without straps, use them strategically, you'll develop pretty good flexors. The hammer curl has come under some criticism recently, and I don't know why. I think it's, when done well, it is a real key exercise for developing the other areas surrounding elbow flexion. So it develops the brachioradialis, this one here, as well as the, can we see that there on the camera? Yeah. Sure. The brachialis that sits between your bicep and tricep.
That is unpumped.
That is, yeah, that's what you think. So doing this neutral grip really does bring up that forearm and outer biceps muscle, which you're not going to get from just doing your regular curls. So I would put that in as part of your biceps homework to overload it. Of course, you could throw in neutral grip rows, but we're already doing those. This is about underrated exercises that will develop the forearms, and I'd say hammer curl, put them in there.
Cool. Yeah, I love hammer curls. I think they're underrated and super good, super important, and a lot of people are lagging and lacking in that area. Like some people have the biceps, but then they do lack the overall thickness. And then I've seen some people with okay upper arms, but then they're lagging and lacking in the forearms, and it just looks a little bit strange. Yeah. Sometimes you just can't put your finger on it. You're like, okay, well, there's something missing there. And I think, yeah, relying on straps too much can do that. And
the hammer curl is an exercise where you want to ego lift. This isn't one where you're going to use a perfect big squeeze there, slow, controlled, eccentric down. I like the example of Doug Miller, his form when he's doing these. Heavy ass weights, just absolutely slanging them up and down, and just seems to match the overloadability of hammer curls. Yeah. Because if I was just to use light weights, perfect form, I'm not tapping into that muscle damage that I get from just loose form towards the end. Really getting that muscle damage, make sure that's the limiting factor. Yeah, for sure. And it's one of the most elbow-friendly curls out there compared to an underhand grip where sometimes, the elbows can get a little beaten up. If someone is doing underhand stuff and like really flinging weights around, I wouldn't really recommend that. But that neutral grip is just so sturdy, and it's how we are at rest. If you're just sitting there, you're standing there, you're not, if you saw someone sitting there like this, you'd be like, all right, well, what's weird? Jeff, have you not referred to the anatomical chart where we should be standing?
The Vitruvian. Whoops.
Whoopsies.
Messed that up.
Yeah, that's perfect posture, by the way.
but typically, most normal humans are neutral grips.
Airport security, man. What are you doing at airport security? You got to be like this. I've got to get prepared to do that in a moment.
Sorry, on the neutral. I am going to say a reverse grip curl. So we've done neutral hammer. I'm going to say reverse grip. This one I would say is in some ways the opposite, because it's one that you probably don't want to go super heavy on. Because for this, the fingers are not going to usually be the limiting factor. Sometimes it might take some adaptation time so you can totally grip the dumbbell. You might find the dumbbell sliding up slightly until it gets to like the top of the dumbbell, which is fine. But for a reverse grip, often your hands will be the limiter. The forearms will be the limiter. And so I wouldn't even really think about this as like an upper arm movement. It's more just for the forearms. Yeah. And this is one where higher reps, 12s, 15s, even 20, and then also going beyond failure, I think, with doing partials at the end. Yeah, it's such a sick exercise because as you're doing elbow flexion, curling up, you extend your wrist to the top, and then as you're coming down, you'll lose it. You'll lose it, and then you get a stretch through there. You're getting more. It's more active. Like some people might say on paper, oh, it's just an isometric. It's not. Yeah. It's getting the stretch, which is what we like through the extensors, which is a undertrained area, because we know we're not going to sit there and put our forearm on our leg and just do extensions in this way. We want to hide the medicine within the exercise that we're going to do, because no one's skipping curls. Everyone's doing their curls. If you can find a way to just sneak in some forearms in there, hammer curl for this part of your forearm, the outer bicep, pronated bicep curls, then that's fantastic. And I think it's just a little bit more dynamic as well, right? Because it is not just super isolation. You have the ability to get a little bit of oomph involved, either like maybe some rotation or maybe some hips involved, which a little bit is totally fine. Whereas if you're just locked into a bench and it's just isolation, you don't really have that freedom to move a little bit more naturally. No, we don't. If you want to keep learning, there's plenty more videos for you to watch with
yours truly, Fitness FAQs, and the mastermind of hypertrophy, Professor, the gargantuan, ginormous Geoffrey Verity Schofield. So check out some more of this content over here.